Last night I was out and about when I made the somewhat spontaneous decision to stop at a movie theater and check out Antman and the Wasp Quantumania. Turns out that was a pretty bad idea. It's no secret that the MCU was struggling during Phase 4, with the exception of Spider-Man No Way Home. Every other movie in Phase 4 was a failure. Those movies either barely broke even, or in some cases they even lost money. The TV series that aired on Disney Plus did even worse. We just found out earlier this week that not a single Disney Plus MCU show made it into the top 15 streaming shows of 2022. It must be pretty awful for Disney when their high-budget CGI-packed shows get absolutely destroyed in the ratings by another show that had their series finale years ago and is only currently running reruns. However, even among a list limited to only new original content, those same Disney Plus MCU shows are still nowhere to be found. It's obvious that Disney made some pretty serious mistakes in Phase 4, and Ant-Man very much needed a big win to kick off the start of Phase 5. Let me show you a picture of the theater that I was in last night. Notice the distinct lack of people. Yeah, that big win Disney was hoping for? I don't think it's gonna happen. Now, I'm not gonna say that this is the worst MCU film ever made. The Eternals, Shang-Chi, Black Widow, Thor: Love and Thunder, all of those movies are very much worse than Ant-Man Quantumania. But make no mistake, Quantumania is still an absolutely terrible movie. It's just not quite as dog shit as the others.
I expect nothing, and I'm still let down.
I think the only good thing about this movie is Paul Rudd as Scott Lang. It seems like he actually cares about the character. He puts in a good performance. It's unfortunate that Disney has kind of misused and underutilized the Ant-Man character, and also they seem to want to sideline him in his own movies. And really, it's kind of a shame that it happens because he does a good job, but that's probably the only good thing I can say about that. Unfortunately, there's a lot of bad. There is a lot of bad in this movie. For those of you wondering, yes, there is some unbelievably stupid woke garbage in this movie. We'll get to that a little bit later on. But first, I want to give you an idea of just how much this movie relied on CGI. Let me show you a picture of the background scenery. Looks pretty, doesn't it? And here's an image of the buildings. And then here's an image of the creatures. And here's an image of other people that you see in the quantum realm. And then here's an image of the costume that a lot of the people were wearing. Do you happen to notice a pattern here? With the exception of a few brief minutes at the very beginning and at the very end of the movie, the whole fucking thing is nothing but green screen. There are a few parts that do look decent, but most of it is terrible. And I don't know how CGI is somehow getting worse over the years. Stuff from 5 years ago looks better than this. Oftentimes in this movie, it looked like the characters are walking through a cartoon. The contrast between the actual actors versus all of the CGI garbage in the background is so significant that you can practically see a line that is being drawn around each of the actors. You can very, very easily tell where something real stops and all the fake nonsense begins. It's very off-putting and completely shatters any sense of immersion. One of the worst examples of CGI comes in the form of MODOK. This is supposed to be a big surprise character reveal because it brings back the villain from the first movie, Darren, also known as Yellow Jacket. When he was defeated at the end of that first movie, he was sent down to the quantum realm, but it kind of screwed up and his head ended up really big and then the rest of his body was small. Then he was put into some machinery and given a new title of MODOK, which stands for Mechanized Organism Designed Only for Killing. Now, it should be noted that this version of MODOK in the movie is not the same character from the comics. In fact, their backstory is completely different. There is nothing similar about these characters at all except a basic appearance and the use of the name. And I have to wonder, why even bother? If you're going to change every single thing about the character that made it the character, then why not just make something new? Why take something from the comics and just ruin it? It doesn't make any sense. Regardless, the point that I'm trying to make here is that the CGI for MODOK is horrendous. It is fucking awful.
Oh my God! What's wrong with your face?
I don't know what the fuck they were thinking. This is what the character is supposed to look like from the comics, and while there are some strange changes to proportion, he still has an actual face that, works in 3 dimensions. But in the movie, even though the character has the correct facial features, like eyes, nose, and a mouth, none of it looks 3-dimensional. Instead, it looks like someone took a video of the actor's face, stretched it, and then worked it a little bit, and then slapped it onto a flat screen and just kind of pressed it onto the character, and that's what you get. So you have a face that's basically 2-dimensional that looks like it's fake 3-dimensional, and it doesn't work. It looks weird, and it doesn't. It's horrible. It's terrible. It is so bad. It genuinely gives the CGI on the She-Hulk series a run for its money. That's how terrible it is.
Why don't I just wear a sign that says "too ugly to live"?
But that's just how the movie looks. The plot is a whole nother problem. It is contrived to the extreme. Let's go through a brief summary. Scott's daughter, Cassie, creates a device that's capable of creating a map of the quantum realm without actually traveling there. She did this without ever telling Janet Van Dyne, the person that lived in the quantum realm for like 30 years. They have some throwaway line of dialogue as to why they didn't tell her, but it's just dumb and really doesn't make any sense. It happens so that the plot can happen, so the movie can happen. Oh yeah, and that brings up another point. In the previous Ant-Man movie, it was shown that Janet Van Dyne had some sort of magic powers that she got while she was in the quantum realm. This movie doesn't mention it at all. Not once. It's like the people who wrote this movie simply forgot that Janet now has some sort of quantum realm magic powers. It would be one thing if they gave at least a little bit of an explanation that she had lost her powers because she had been outside the quantum realm for too long, or she couldn't use them for this, that, or the other reason, but we don't get any of that at all. There is no explanation on why Janet can't use her powers, or even if she has them anymore. We don't even know. It's just gone.
Danny kind of forgot it.
Regardless, Janet gets upset about the device. They go to shut it down, but somehow it opens a portal and everybody gets sucked into the quantum realm. They're separated into 2 groups, Scott and Cassie in one group, Janet, Hank, and Hope in the other group. Scott and Cassie are quickly captured by a group of locals led by non-white, strong female character who turns out to be an insufferable bitch. I know, big surprise on that one, huh? I mean, who would have thought that those specific character traits would apply to non-white, strong female character? I mean, it's almost unheard of.
I am shocked and appalled.
Regardless, they're forced to drink this red ooze stuff, which instantly grants Scott and Cassie the ability to communicate with everyone in the quantum realm. Very convenient, I'm sure. Meanwhile, Janet happens to run into a group of people that she knew from back in the day who just give her a giant flying animal thing, and all of this happens within 5 minutes of them being inside the quantum realm. Janet then takes the flying thing over to a city, and her and the others go into a bar where she orders some more of that red ooze, and it instantly grants Hope and Hank the ability to understand everyone in the quantum realm. So again, yay, everyone can now communicate in the quantum realm. This is all just awful and contrived, and I have to ask, why are they even bothering to do this? If you look at the other MCU content, like Thor Ragnarok or Guardians of the Galaxy, almost all the aliens can basically speak with one another. It's never really addressed that, hey, yeah, they're probably speaking different languages and this and that and whatever. Sometimes characters get subtitles, but for the most part, everybody can just understand everybody else. And it assumes that it's necessary, because they need the movie to happen, and they don't want to have to constantly go through this, well, he can't understand and they can't understand, so they just kind of ignore it and go along with it. But in Quantumania, the movie makes this incredibly huge deal about how people can't understand each other and they need to drink the red ooze in order to communicate. Scott is captured by this group of whatever, and then it's treated like some sort of big, dangerous, scary thing, and there's a huge crowd of angry creatures and aliens and stuff and whatever that are surrounding him, and they're chanting this unknown language, and Scott looks like he's in a lot of danger, and oh no, what are they gonna do with him? And then they force him to drink the red ooze, and it just becomes a joke, because, oh, now he can understand everybody, and yeah, they weren't chanting anything bad, they were just chanting, drink the ooze.
What a story.
I already mentioned that contrived situation where Janet met with someone and gets the free flying animal thing, but not too long after, she arrives at a bar and she needs to set up a meeting with some other person that she used to know when she was down there. And it only takes about 30 seconds for this person to arrive. Now, if the person was already in the building, then that wouldn't really be a big deal. Hey, you can go into the other room. Hey, he wants to speak to so-and-so. Can you come and get him? Yeah, that would be fine. Except that's not the case. What happens here is she tells the bartender or some other person, she's like, hey, I need to speak to what's-his-face. And then maybe 30 seconds later, a spaceship comes in roaring super fast and then suddenly stops next to the side of the top of the building, and the guy that she wanted to talk to gets out.
That is an entirely implausible plot development.
So how far away was this person when they got the message? I mean, even if they got the phone call and they left right away, I mean, it was only like 30 seconds between, hey, I need to talk to him, and then suddenly you have a spaceship come roaring into the building. Like, what is going on here? And as it turns out, the person she needed to talk to was Bill Murray, who is completely and totally wasted in this movie. He has about 5 minutes of screen time, which is just him saying a bunch of stupid things and making some innuendo about Janet. And then he gets killed by some giant squid thing, and we never see or hear from him again, and that's it. Keep in mind, this entire time, Janet has been refusing to give any answers to Hope and Hank about all the potential problems that they're going to experience while they're in the quantum realm. They ran into a bunch of situations where Janet just doesn't explain anything to him. She's like, hey, you need to hide here and we just need to wait. And they ask her, like, what was that? And she's like, don't worry about it. And this happens again and again and again. And every time the group goes into this situation, both Hank and Hope are clueless as to what's going on. They just have no friggin' clue what they should be doing, where they should be going. They don't know who's friendly. They don't know what's dangerous. They don't know what's going on, what they should be looking out for. Janet simply refuses to tell them anything. And of course, all of this is done to increase the artificial tension and so that she can get this big reveal of backstory about halfway through the movie.
It's a stupid idea!
What's more ridiculous about all this is that Janet keeps telling them that the reason she can't explain is because she doesn't have enough time. And yet, these three characters will spend a large amount of time simply walking from one place to another or flying from one place to another. This group has several hours of downtime where they are traveling, and Janet could be explaining all of this stuff, but she just doesn't. Eventually, in the second half, we learn that when Janet was trapped in the quantum realm, the first person she met was a version of Kang the Conqueror. More specifically, it's a racistly blackwashed version of Kang the Conqueror, played by Jonathan Majors. He first appeared in the Loki series and did a truly awful job at portraying the version of Kang known as He Who Remains. In fact, Jonathan Majors acted more like a clown than anything else. In this movie, he gives a different performance and tries to portray this version of We Was Kangs as more sinister and evil, but once more, he fails again. Even if we ignore the blatantly racist blackwashing of the character, Jonathan Majors simply was not a good choice for this role. He just doesn't perform well. We learn that this version of We Was Kangs had been exiled to the quantum realm because he's the one that started the multiversal war, and he was trying to take out all of the other We Was Kangs. Now, he did this not entirely for evil reasons. He did it because of something known as the incursions. And this is when one universe collides with an alternate universe, and it results in the complete destruction of both universes or both timelines. And if left unchecked, it would result in the annihilation of all reality everywhere. Every timeline, every dimension, everything everywhere would be completely gone. And this is why We Was Kangs was starting the multiversal war, so that he could try to put a limit on that. He was doing this as a way of pruning out the extra timelines that would cause problems in a very similar method to the one used by He Who Remains in the Loki series. In fact, I would not be surprised at all if this We Was Kangs turned out to be the same version that we saw at the end of the Loki series. It just was him at a different point in his lifetime. Eventually, Scott and Cassie get captured, and Scott is forced to help We Was Kangs in exchange for the safety of his daughter. Now, this is different from what we saw in the trailers, because those trailers made it look like We Was Kangs was giving an offer to Scott, where Scott would be able to go back in time and be able to live all those years with his daughter that he had missed during the snap. And so that was kind of the offer that we saw in the trailers, except that doesn't happen in the movie at all. It's not even mentioned. Instead, what happens in the movie is We Was Kangs just says, look, Scott, you either help me or I'm going to kill Cassie, and that's basically it. It's very simple. Something important to note about Kang the Conqueror from the comics is that while he's definitely an evil person, he's also one of the more honorable villains. He has a strict code that he follows. Since he's able to very easily travel through time, he could just go back and prevent one of his enemies from ever existing. However, he refuses to do this because he views it as being weak. He knows that he is better than everyone else, and he wants to prove that by defeating them in combat. And that is why it's very strange and completely and totally out of character for what he does to Scott after Scott recovers the multiverse engine thing that he needed to get in order to help Cassie. Instead of honoring the deal, We Was Kang says, oh, don't worry, Cassie will be safe with me from now on, and then Scott gets really angry about this. And this is also in direct conflict with the character traits that have been established earlier in this movie for this version of We Was Kangs. When Janet is working with We Was Kangs and they manage to fix his time chair, she accidentally gets a glimpse of who he really is and what he had done with the multiversal war and that he had destroyed entire planets and galaxies and this and that and blah, 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 whatever. So he was a bad guy. But even knowing this, even despite all this and knowing that Janet could potentially be a threat, he had offered her an agreement that he would take her home if she helped him. And even though she is now considered to be a threat because of her knowledge, he is still willing to fulfill his end of the deal, and he will bring her back to her home. And this is the kind of character that he is. Yes, he's evil, but he also has that code of honor. So him arbitrarily breaking the deal with Scott simply doesn't make any sense at all. It is completely out of character for him to do it, and the only reason why this happens is so that it can set up the conflict for later in the movie.
A character's actions must flow inexorably from his or her established traits.
We also see that this version of We Was Kangs has created an empire in the quantum realm, and a lot of people that live there don't like him because he's basically a tyrant. So at the end of the movie, a large group of the inhabitants are rallied to attack his base. The way that this is handled was absolutely meant to replicate the final battle situation in the Endgame movie. All of the old characters triumphantly returning to battle with Thanos, and it was a big emotional and inspirational moment for the movie. Quantumania tries to do the same thing and fails utterly because all of these characters that are involved in this big attack, we only met them just a few minutes ago. Most of them don't even have names. Like, they're not even mentioned by name during the movie. So you would have to go outside the movie, look at some website or an IMDb page or something to find out the name of these characters, and we're supposed to care about them? Why? The movie wants us to pretend that all of these characters mean something and it's this big heroic moment, but it just doesn't work. But it gets even dumber because as part of this empire, We Was Kangs has built a very large army. We're talking soldiers, ships, all kinds of stuff, and he plans on using this army to continue his multiverse war and defeat all of the other We Was Kangs, which seems kind of silly because his entire army is defeated by Antman and a bunch of those angry people from the quantum realm who are just basically using whatever scrap weapons they can get a hold of. His army is presented as this colossal threat to the entire multiverse, but it gets wiped out by a bunch of low-tier morons in an afternoon. Eventually, he is defeated himself, and he's pulled inside the multiverse engine thing. Now, at first, Scott thinks that he might be dead, but later on, he kind of thinks back on it, and he's not so sure. In fact, I think it's very likely that this version of We Was Kangs is still alive and trapped inside the multiverse engine thing. Now, there is a post-credit scene as well, where we see an entire army made up of different versions of We Was Kangs. So while the version in this movie is gone, at least temporarily, it looks like some version of We Was Kangs is going to be the villain in pretty much every movie going forward in the Phase 5 of the MCU, which I'm sure is not going to get very dull and boring and redundant, and I'm sure that it's going to help the slumping ticket sales for the MCU. Earlier, I mentioned that there was a bunch of woke nonsense. At the beginning of the movie, Cassie is bailed out of jail by her father because she was attending a, quote, mostly peaceful protest. She claims that it was just a bunch of homeless people living in a camp and that the police were using tear gas and violence against them. They have a homeless camp? What is this supposed to be, San Francisco? Although if that was the case, there wouldn't be any police action because they don't actually do anything about crime in California anymore. They just let them do whatever they want.
Know your fucking place, trash.
But all of this is dumb, and the logic doesn't add up because Cassie claims that all these people are homeless because they returned after the snap. But how could it be that they're homeless? Let's say you have a huge apartment building with 100 different apartments in it. If half the people in the world disappear, then roughly half of those apartments are now going to be empty. It's not going to be an exact because you have multiple people living in the same apartment, but it would be fairly close to half empty, right? So the assumption here is that all the empty apartments are now full, and that after the people returned to being alive from the snap, now they have nowhere to stay. But that raises the question, if half the people in the world were gone, then who was it that filled all those empty apartments?
Don't ask questions. Just consume product and then get excited for next product.
Another moment of breathtaking woke stupidity is late in the movie when Hank is talking about ants, and he mentions how smart and cooperative they are, and he starts a sentence by saying, I know that socialism is a charged word, but... And then he doesn't actually get to finish the sentence because they cut him off and they continue with some other stuff. But essentially what he's arguing here is that socialism is good because the ants were able to prove that they could make it work. Of course, he neglects to mention that ants are also cannibals and that they will not hesitate to sacrifice any number of individuals for the collective good.
I am a proud member of the Communist Party.
Although I would have to argue that sort of behavior probably not good. Overall, the movie is slow, it's boring, it's padded with an enormous amount of stupid nonsense, jokes that are extremely cringe or just fall flat entirely, and despite the movie being 99% CGI, it is ugly to look at. I don't think that it's the worst MCU film ever made, but it is lifeless and forgettable. In other words, Phase 5 of the MCU is off to a really rough start.
Taking shots at the enemy. I'm gonna make it to the top, leave a legacy. If I got something to say, you better let me speak. Turn it up a new degree, bitch, you ain't seen anything. I pop off with the new rock, electronic, blow the